Have you ever loved someone, only to realize that their attention is no longer focused on you? How would you handle it if your partner couldn't respect a simple request? This is exactly what happened when the protagonist discovered that his girlfriend had been in constant contact with her ex. The messages were coming late at night, making him uncomfortable, but what's worse is that she didn't seem to understand his concerns. Was he overreacting by asking her to stop texting him, or was he just setting a boundary that anyone would expect? Olivia, the protagonist's girlfriend, had started receiving frequent messages and calls from her ex. At first, it seemed harmless, just a few likes on her social media posts. But soon, it escalated. Late-night conversations, inside jokes, and memes from her ex began flooding her phone. This constant barrage of communication left the protagonist feeling uneasy and deeply uncomfortable. He tried to ignore it, but as days passed, the feeling of betrayal and insecurity grew stronger. One evening, as they were watching a movie, her phone buzzed once again. She grabbed it quickly, but the protagonist couldn't help but catch a glimpse of the notification. It was from her ex, and the preview read, "I can't stop thinking about that night we." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Instead of addressing the situation or explaining herself, Olivia pulled the phone close to her chest and muttered, "You don't own me." The frustration hit him like a wave. It wasn't just the constant late-night texts. It was her refusal to acknowledge how much it bothered him, her dismissive attitude toward his feelings. Feeling powerless in that moment, he asked her quietly, "Can you please stop texting him? It makes me uncomfortable, especially the late-night messages." Her response was immediate, defensive, and angry. She stormed off to their bedroom, leaving him alone with his thoughts. And then, a few minutes later, the unexpected happened. Olivia tweeted a message that would change everything. "I'm not property. I'm a person with rights. No one gets to control who I talk to." The tweet wasn't just a casual statement, it was a declaration of independence, an emotional outburst that caught him completely off guard. It was at that moment that the protagonist realized things had gone too far. He wasn't just asking for a simple favor anymore, he was being treated as though his feelings didn't matter. And when he retweeted her post, "Respecting your right to be single," it wasn't just a passive response, it was a declaration of respect for the decision she had clearly made. He was done. He packed up his things, left a note, and moved out. The tension between the two had reached a boiling point, and now, there was no turning back. The protagonist's decision wasn't about control or jealousy. It was about respecting himself, setting boundaries, and not allowing his feelings to be dismissed anymore. After the tweet, the protagonist knew there was no turning back. Olivia's actions had made it clear that their relationship was no longer built on mutual respect. She had aired their private issues publicly, turning a personal disagreement into a spectacle for everyone to see. He couldn't tolerate this betrayal any longer. The following morning, he packed up his things, leaving their shared apartment. It wasn't just about the constant texts and calls from her ex, it was the way she disregarded his feelings and the way she chose social media over a conversation between the two of them. He moved into his friend Sean's spare room, not waiting around for Olivia's next move. He wasn't just walking away from her, he was walking away from the disrespect that had built up over time. He had hoped that by leaving, he would be able to gain some peace of mind, but the flood of messages from Olivia began almost immediately. Her first message came within hours, followed by a barrage of calls, each one more frantic than the last. "Where are you? Why are you doing this? We need to talk like adults," she wrote. But he didn't respond. He couldn't bring himself to pick up the phone. Each message felt like an attempt to pull him back into a toxic cycle. Olivia wasn't the person he once knew, she was now someone who couldn't respect a simple request, and that was something he couldn't ignore. The next move from Olivia wasn't surprising. She took to Twitter again, posting a series of emotionally charged tweets about how she was being controlled and how her rights were being violated. Her followers, many of whom knew nothing of the full story, rallied behind her, calling the protagonist manipulative and accusing him of trying to control her independence. She was painting him as the villain, turning public opinion against him with each tweet. But he didn't care anymore. Her words no longer held any power over him. He had made his decision, and that was final. The protagonist's actions in the following days reflected his growing resolve. He began to make the necessary changes to their shared finances, starting with the accounts they had linked together. He cancelled the subscriptions that were still tied to their joint accounts, Netflix, Hulu, and HBO Max. He didn't feel the need to explain himself, he had every right to do so. Olivia had chosen to air their personal issues in public, and now she would deal with the consequences. Still, Olivia's persistence continued. The calls came relentlessly, with each one growing more desperate. He could hear her frustration through the voicemails. "Why are you doing this to me?" she would cry. "I don't understand. I just want to fix things." But there was nothing left to fix. He was tired of being ignored and dismissed. His feelings had been invalidated for too long, and now he was putting himself first. Every decision he made after that was deliberate, each one cutting ties more firmly. He was no longer reactive, he was proactive. This wasn't about anger or frustration anymore, this was about self-respect. He was taking back control of his life, something he hadn't done in a long time. Olivia wasn't ready to let go, and her frustration grew with each passing day. Instead of accepting the reality of their situation, she took to social media once again, pouring out her emotions and making the situation even messier. Her posts were full of accusations, blaming the protagonist for being controlling and manipulative, but what hurt more was the way she made their private relationship public. It was no longer just about the two of them, it had become a spectacle for everyone to watch. Her friends and family, many of whom were unaware of the full story, started to intervene. They called him repeatedly, urging him to reconsider his decision. Olivia's best friend, Catherine, was the first to call, her voice breaking as she pleaded, "You can't just throw everything away over a stupid argument. Olivia's a mess, and she needs you right now." Her words were filled with emotion, but the protagonist remained resolute. He knew that he couldn't go back, not after everything that had happened. Then came the phone call from Olivia's mother. "Hi, Noah," her mother said, her voice soft and full of concern. "I heard you two are having some issues. Olivia's really struggling with all of this. Maybe it's time for you to be the bigger person and apologize. Relationships require compromise, don't they?" Olivia's mother didn't know the full story either, but she was trying to mediate, urging him to make things right. "She's been crying for days," Olivia's mom continued. "She's so upset. You can't just leave her like this." But the protagonist's heart didn't soften. He had been the one who had been disrespected, and no amount of emotional manipulation was going to change his mind. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore." She made her choice. "I'm just respecting that choice," he said, his voice steady but firm. The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes, and the conversation ended there. Olivia didn't stop. She continued to post, and her friends continued to pressure him. Catherine called again, this time in tears. "You're destroying her life, Noah. She's never been like this before. I don't know what happened to you two, but you can't just walk away." The protagonist felt the weight of her words, but he couldn't ignore the truth. Olivia had chosen her ex and her independence over him, and he couldn't live in a relationship where his feelings were constantly dismissed. Every attempt to reconcile only deepened the rift. Olivia's pleas, her apologies, and her attempts to make him feel guilty only confirmed that she wasn't truly understanding the gravity of her actions. She wasn't taking responsibility. She was trying to make him feel as though he was the one at fault, when in reality, it was her choices that had led them to this point. The protagonist could feel the pressure mounting. The people closest to him were urging him to cave, to give her another chance, but he remained firm. He had reached his breaking point, and he knew there was no turning back. His decision had been made long ago, and despite the emotional tug-of-war, he stood by it. He was no longer just fighting for himself, he was fighting for his peace of mind, for his dignity. As the situation escalated, the tension became almost unbearable. Olivia's public posts, the pressure from her family and friends, and her constant attempts to manipulate the situation created a toxic environment that the protagonist could no longer endure. He had drawn his line in the sand, and no amount of apologies or tears was going to change his mind. This was no longer about love, it was about self-respect. As Olivia continued her extreme actions and placed all the blame on him, the protagonist reached a point where he could no longer tolerate the emotional turmoil. He had made his decision, and it was final. He wasn't just walking away from Olivia, he was walking away from the toxic environment she had created. It wasn't easy, but he knew deep down that this was the only way forward. He had learned a crucial lesson about not handing over his personal power to anyone else. His happiness, his peace of mind, those were things he needed to protect, and that meant taking control of his life. Olivia, on the other hand, eventually came to the realization that she was the one who had caused all the problems. She understood, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. She couldn't undo her actions or the way she had treated him. With nowhere else to turn, Olivia moved back in with her mother. She had to face the consequences of her choices, and the life she had once shared with the protagonist was now a distant memory. As much as she regretted her decisions, she was left to rebuild her life from scratch. For the protagonist, things started to fall into place. He found peace in his decision to move on. The weight of the relationship was finally lifted off his shoulders, and he felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in a long time. He began to focus on himself again, his work, his well-being, his future. The self-respect he had fought so hard to regain was now intact. The tension, the constant emotional roller coaster, was over. He was free to live his life without the baggage of an unhealthy relationship weighing him down. The protagonist didn't rush into another relationship. He knew that he needed time to heal and rediscover who he was outside of a romantic relationship. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole again. He didn't need someone else to complete him, he was enough on his own. And this realization brought him a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. This was not just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a new one. A chapter where he prioritized himself, his happiness, and his mental well-being. A chapter where he understood that boundaries were not meant to be crossed, and that true love began with respecting oneself. The protagonist had finally found what he had been looking for all along, his own sense of freedom and the respect he deserved. Now that you've heard the story, what do you think? How would you handle a situation like this? Have you ever faced a relationship challenge where you had to set a boundary? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories and discussions. We're building a community, and your voice matters here. Thanks for watching.